All right, Jimmy Ott along with Paul Stone talking college football every week. His top picks, his best bets, 3 to 5 best bets as we try and get things going again. 2-2 week last week, so 6-6 for the season. Let's get to the big one, Paul. And it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when we have guests on and cite much better numbers that are around that are no longer around, but we have you documented back in the summertime. A little bit of a look ahead spot. You loved Notre Dame plus those 8 points. We had a lot of conversation exactly what it was going to be on, and what because I think Notre Dame could be the better team, and they're at home. So the line opens up 3.5. That's where it is right now at BetRivers. Notre Dame catching 3.5 against Ohio State in this primetime matchup.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Jimmy, neither team's really been truly tested to this point in the season. Notre Dame did have to travel to North Carolina State a couple of weeks ago as a 7-point road favorite, won that game handily 45-24. I think it comes down to the quarterback position. I don't think that's any great revelation on my part, but much has been made about the Fighting Irish's addition of Sam Hartman, the biggest addition of any school through the transfer portal during the offseason. He played 5 seasons at Wake Forest before transferring to Notre Dame in the offseason. A very small sample size to this point, only 4 games, and against light competition at that. But Hartman certainly hasn't disappointed to this point. He's completed 71% of his throws, almost 12 yards and a pass attempt on average, and has a 13-0 touchdown to interception ratio. So he's been really good. And while Hartman, again, is in his 6th year, Ohio State quarterback Kyle McCord only making his 4th career collegiate start. And although the Buckeyes opened the season in Indiana, I think one could argue this is his first true road game in a hostile environment. Going to Notre Dame, certainly, even though they're in the same state, going to Notre Dame, certainly a different situation than playing at Indiana. The first 3 games of McCord's career, Ohio State favored by 30 or more points. So this is his first game opponent, if you will. You look at Notre Dame in this role of home underdog since the start of the 28 season, so 15 years ago. Notre Dame's only been a home underdog 11 times. They're 9-2 against the spread as a home underdog in those 11 matchups. One personnel situation, I think, that bodes, fairly well for Notre Dame. Ohio State, in my opinion, unquestionably has the best receiving corps in all of college football. Notre Dame has a good secondary. They've got 2 really strong cornerbacks in Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. So they match up better against those guys than most teams. They might not be able to shut them down, but they can perhaps limit that Ohio State pass game. Going to be a night game there in South Bend. I think Notre Dame has an excellent shot to win. I like Notre Dame plus 3.5 over Ohio State.
Yeah, I think the rosters are as close as they've been in a long time as well. Maybe the quarterback play is affected how we look at that. But anyway, Notre Dame plus the 3.5 in the big one against Ohio State. Wyoming, they upset Texas Tech early, went to Austin and gave UT all they could handle, 10-10 in the 4th quarter before Texas scored the last 21, the last one on a pick 6. It was not as close as the final. I mean, it was not as lopsided as the final score indicated. Regardless, Wyoming covered the spread easily. Appalachian State, a near miss in Chapel Hill. They take care of East Carolina. Now they travel to the highest altitude of any college football venue in Laramie, Wyoming. Cowboys at home, Wyoming 2.5 over App State.
Yeah, this Wyoming team, just a scrappy bunch. They're obviously not explosive offensively, but they got a great coach in Craig Bowl, and they just scratch and claw. Their starting quarterback, Andrew Peasley, did not play last week against Texas. He's mostly a game manager, though. I think there's a good chance he misses again this week. But backup Evan Swoboda, he filled in admirably, I think, against the Longhorns. I don't really think there's a significant downgrade if Swoboda plays again this week. Looking at Wyoming to this point, of course, they upset Texas Tech in their season opener there in Laramie in overtime as a 14-point underdog. And then, as you mentioned, last week against Texas, tied at 10 through three quarters. The Longhorns scored 21 points in the fourth quarter, a misleading 31-10 victory for the Longhorns. And again, getting back to the coaching matchup in this game, I think Wyoming has a clear coaching advantage. Craig Bowl over Appalachian State's Sean Clark. The Mountaineers, they have fared extremely poor in what I call contest with a competitive point spread. Since the start of 2020, when the point spread closes at 7 or fewer points, whether they're the favorite or the underdog, Appalachian State only 1-12 against the spread in those types of games. As you mentioned, they're playing in the altitude, the highest stadium in all of college football at over 7,200 feet. Wyoming does have an advantage playing in Laramie. They're 27-14-1 there in Laramie since the start of 2016. Over that same span, off a straight-up loss, as they are in this situation, the Cowboys also a money-making 21-14 against the spread. Add it all up, I like Wyoming to win by more than a field goal. Take Wyoming -2.5 over Appalachian State.
Well, Murfreesboro, Tennessee has a nice act to follow in that setting in Boulder. A little emotion in that game at Colorado State. How much do the Rams have left in the tank as they travel just outside of Nashville to take on the Blue Raiders of Middle Tennessee State? Middle Tennessee State catching Colorado State at a favorable time here, laying 2.5 at home.
I mean, you hit a lot of my bases for this play. There's nothing really fancy about it. College football teams, they play 12 games during the regular season, and there's no way that they come into each game with the same amount of what I call collective team psyche. Last week at this time, Colorado State preparing for that huge game at Colorado. Their coach Jay Norvell questioning Coach Prime's manners. Saying that his mother taught him to take his hat and sunglasses off, quote, when I talk to grown-ups, end quote. I'm not sure I would have poked the bear, so to speak, as Norvell did, but I believe it worked. I mean, Colorado State played inspired football, perhaps over-inspired at times, to be frank about it. In closing, as a 23.5-point road underdog, they led for much of the game, ultimately lost 43-35 in double overtime. They just couldn't overcome 4 turnovers and 17 penalties for almost 200 yards, 182 yards. You can't be penalized to that degree. Just not clean football, too undisciplined to close the deal, in my opinion. Without question, as you mentioned, Colorado State, they emptied their emotional tank against Colorado. Now they travel more than 1,200 miles to the east, as you mentioned, to Murfreesboro. Just a game that I'm just not seeing a peak emotional performance from Colorado State. This is a game they lost to Middle Tennessee last year in Fort Collins. This is a situational play, a spot play all the way, but I think Middle Tennessee is going to beat Colorado State by more than a field goal, so take Middle -2.5 over the Rams.
Even in a lopsided loss against Alabama, Middle Tennessee State more than competitive up in Columbia against Missouri. We see that Missouri is still undefeated and just knocked off Kansas State. So the eyeball test tells you Middle Tennessee State not bad as well. So and you talk about, just over-inspired, as you put it. Not so much over-inspired with the game management at the end, though. I would like to try and beat Colorado with their defense on the field on 4th and 2 instead of try and beat them with their offense on the field. So part of analytics, man. Watch how the game is unfolding. All right, let's go to Syracuse, New York, and Army coming to town after a win over Texas San Antonio. Texas San Antonio 0-3 against the spread. With their 7-year quarterback in Harris, it's a little bit less than a spectacular beginning for them, which was thought to be, a big season. Looks like Tulane's the class of the American this year. Army's catching 14, Paul, in the Carrier Dome at Syracuse.
Yeah, first of all, this Army team, Jeff Monken, their head coach, they've got a new offensive coordinator in Drew Thatcher. who comes over from Division II Nebraska-Kearney. The Cadets said in the offseason that they're going to throw the ball more. And through 3 games, they have thrown it more. They've thrown it an average of 15 times a game to this point, which is really, pretty high for them. They averaged only 10 pass attempts last year. Bryson Daly, Army's first-year starting quarterback, he hadn't really played a whole lot of football until this year, but I think he's improving game by game. In last Friday's 37-29 upset over Texas San Antonio, Daly threw for 133 yards. He passed for another 100. The Cadets, talking about clean football, they ran 83 offensive plays last week against Texas San Antonio. Didn't have a single penalty on either side of the ball. Didn't commit a turnover. A really efficient performance for the Cadets. You look at Syracuse, their first 2 games were tap-ins. Last week, they go to Purdue. They win 35-20 as a 2-point road favorite. But I look at this game against Army, and it's a really tricky spot in my opinion. First of all, they're playing an in-state school, a smaller school, if you will, that's going to be really excited to be playing a larger Power 5 team from their state. Army's zone option offense, even though they do throw the ball, they still run that zone option offense. It's going to be, I think it's an offense that poses tricky preparation challenges, to put it mildly. And you look at this, Syracuse's 3 games on deck following Army. They play Clemson, North Carolina, and Florida State after they meet Army this week. You consider that and might the Orange have an eye on the future as they entertain Army on Saturday. I like Army plus 14 over Syracuse.
It's a little situational spot again for you, Paul, in that one. So Army, and they new offenses too, more of a pistol type of based option attack. But we were keeping our eyes on this with Navy, Army, even North Texas would deal with their defense. But it looks like they're kind of catching on a little bit, the level of execution with their new offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it takes time, and now you're in the 4th game, and I think you've got some of the kinks out. And the fact that they didn't commit any penalties last week, again, didn't turn the ball over, ran 83 plays, which is a lot of plays for a college football team. And they've got some confidence, and I just think Syracuse, again, they play a Big Ten team on the road. At Purdue, a game that they probably had circled somewhat on the early season schedule. And then they've got these 3, basically the favorites of the ACC waiting on deck in Clemson, North Carolina, and Florida State. And I just think it's a natural letdown spot for the Orange. And like Army, they're going to control that football probably. They're probably going to run more plays than Syracuse. 14's a pretty heavy burden to be carrying against an offense such as Army's. So I think the 2 touchdowns are a bargain there. I made the line a little bit closer to 11 in that game.
Army, Colorado State. Level of discipline. Just tough call. I mean, really. Hey, don't forget our friends over at BetRivers. Get extra value this football season with the BetRivers Squares. Again, went up to $10,000 in bonus money. Bet $10 in same-game parlays on any game with the Squares icon to earn a square. Again, $10 same-game parlay on any game with the Squares icon to earn a square. That's brought to you by our friends over at BetRivers. He's Paul Stone. I'm Jimmy Ott. We do it every week with Paul's College Football Best Bets on the Sports Bettor's Paradise on the BetRivers Network.